Hello and welcome, I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Straight Talk. It's been a historic week for Turkey with the strongest turnout in the Republic's democratic life. 87% or 48 million registered voters showed up to drop their ballots into tens of thousands of boxes at schools, airports and hospitals. In the end, Recep Tayyip Erdogan was elected as the first executive president of the Turkish Republic. Erdogan defeated his closest rival Muharrem İnce by more than 20%. While he won the popular vote, his party was unable to gain a simple majority in parliament. It will now need the help of its ally, the MHP, to be able to pass key laws. Alongside the MHP, the E-Party has emerged as another nationalist force. Together, the two combined hold more than 20% of the seats. And then there is the HDP. The pro-Kurdish party's presidential candidate, Selahattin Demirtas, received 9% of the popular vote, despite being behind bars on terrorism charges. The HDP once again crossed the 10% threshold to make it to parliament, depriving the AK party of a significant number of seats. And to discuss this further, I'm joined by Pinar Akpinar, a researcher at Istanbul Policy Center, and by Vehbi Behsan, who is a lecturer at Ibn Khaldun University. Thank you so much for being here. Let's begin with you. Your expectations moving forward. Were you surprised that the AK party made it through, but also the MHP? And more so, there was a lot of talk about a second round of elections, right? The fact that Erdogan won it in the first, what does that tell you?
To be honest, personally, I'm not too surprised because we've been conducting research for the last 2 years on polarization and Kurdish question in Turkey. And the outcomes of this research, and also this year we conducted a survey on social cohesion in Turkey. And the outcomes of this research suggested that the two main problems for Turkish society are security and economy. Ongoing war in Syria and Turkey's military intervention actually gained huge support among Turkish people. And the Turkish people has fears in terms of economy and security. And the new candidates like İnce or the existing ones did not really give hope to Turkish people in terms of these problems. İnce carried out his campaign based on enmity or criticism against Erdogan, but he didn't really offer, significant solutions to existing problems. And people did not want to take risks.
But let's bring in what İnce had to say in his concession speech the following day after hashtag İnce Nerede was trending in Turkey on Twitter, which means where is İnce? Let's hear what he had to say about the elections, the process and the results.
Those countries that have voter turnouts around 30% shouldn't tell us about democracy. We will take our matters into our own hands. Don't worry at all. Turkey will not be divided.
İnce coming out with a statement like that goes to show that there's something more than politics at play here, isn't it? This sense of we are Turks, let us take care of our own.
That I think very important what he did, because it's a kind of little unusual, because like in the previous elections, they tried to create an atmosphere where the votes will be, dodged or kind of stolen away, etc. Or we have these cases where electric cut off and the officials said it was cats went in or something. So they wanted to create an enormous atmosphere where the votes are in danger. Even they came up with this idea that there is this ink when you put your stamp, and after it just evaporates and disappears. So all these things were circulating over there. But in the end of the day, they also blamed Anadolu Agency because they are kind of giving false information. But that all happened after the ballots were closed down. So it's not going to affect the election results. So İnce, very interesting, came up and said, well, look, guys, this is over. We lost, we better accept it. But the message, of course, was now to the CHP, because Muharrem İnce's personal votes are higher than, he got over 30% and CHP got 22%. So that's an interesting thing. So we will now expect in the near future, actually,
it's creating rifts within the party as well.
And it should actually, because when you look at the CHP's history, people's expectations are there, but not much really coming out of it. But likewise, when you look at the votes Erdogan got himself 53%, but AK Parti's votes are 42%. So then AK Party has to really do something, some revisions, which they started a year ago.
Now we're getting reports from Mehmet Şimşek, actually a tweet that he tweeted, linking it to a local article in a local newspaper, where Erdogan and the MHP leader, his coalition partner Bahçeli, have agreed not to extend the state of emergency. And Şimşek says this is indeed very positive. Return to normalcy is gaining momentum.
This is the greatest news I got, let's say, not only today, but probably for the last month. Because, I mean, you cannot really continue.
Because there were extenuating circumstances. Well, this country did face a threat, but now you're saying it's time.
It's time, I mean. For a while it was time anyway, but whatever happened in the past, I think it had to stop. So we should go back to normalization in politics, and people, you know, should be ruled or governed with ordinary rules, laws, etc. And if they're really guilty, they should be punished, or whatever it is. But state of emergency kind of were bypassing all these.
Another thing is about accountability. A lot of the criticisms from the CHP was that having so much power in one man, in the hands of one man, will make him unaccountable. How can the parliament hold the president accountable, for example, is another question that is asked. Well, it can initiate an investigation against the president with 301 votes out of a 600 chamber. So 50% plus one, essentially. Also, it'll take 400 votes to change the constitution, that's 2/3, and 360 votes to call for a referendum. This is what Parliament can do. What can the presidency now do? It can declare a state of emergency, it can appoint ministers and other officials, and it will propose the budget for Parliament to approve. So this is the gist of it. How will it play out? I'll give you guys 30 seconds each. Go ahead, please.
Well, let me begin then. One is that obviously Turkey from now on need very strong, what they call it, NGOs, and we have to establish check and balance system. And obviously, even thinking that there's such a power being in one person's hand is a dangerous thing, etc. So I think that may, if we really work hard, can contribute positively into Turkey's political system if we can accurately and adequately establish check and balance system.
Please go ahead.
Actually, I totally agree with Professor Vehbi that civil society can play a significant role here. The civil space has been significantly restricted in Turkey in the last years. And we certainly need and urgently need a more civil space. And I think what Turkey needs to do is to open this civil space and allow civilian actors to maneuver within the civil space, which could act as a base for checks and balances.
Thank you so much, Pinar Akpinar and Vehbi Beysan. Pleasure. US President Donald Trump has called President Erdogan to congratulate him on his re-election. He made the call as Washington and Ankara reached a deal on the status of the PKK-linked YPG terror group in Manbij in northern Syria. Now, the YPG's control of the town has been a sticking point between the two NATO allies for the past 2 years. Earlier, the two sides agreed on a roadmap, beginning with military patrols around Manbij. Can Hasasu has more.
The first sign of an important agreement between Turkey and the US. Independent military patrols signal the start of a roadmap to ensure security in the Syrian city of Manbij. The deal focuses on the withdrawal of the PKK-linked YPG terror group from Manbij and helping the mostly local Arab population govern the area. Ankara has long been determined to prevent the group's presence on its border with Syria, and it found it unacceptable when the Pentagon decided to arm and train the YPG against Daesh. In August 2016, the YPG forces backed by the US captured Manbij from Daesh. For Turkey, the move was the last straw, and Ankara announced the start of Operation Euphrates Shield. The Free Syrian Army, backed by the Turkish military, advanced on two flanks, taking on Daesh's stronghold in Al-Bab in the west and facing off against the YPG in Manbij in the east. But the US Army stopped the FSA's advance towards Manbij by setting up posts on Sajur River. Earlier this year, the Turkish army moved against another YPG pocket on its border with Operation Olive Branch. In less than 2 months, the YPG had been driven out of Afrin. But the situation became more complicated due to mixed messages from the US. It was clear that the US administration and the Pentagon had different views on Syria's future.
And by the way, we're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now.
Just 2 months later, the head of the US military's Central Command visited his troops in Manbij.
My goal for the visit here is to continue to demonstrate our very strong support for the Manbij Military Council, for the civil administration of Manbij, and to visit the soldiers that we have here supporting them.
Despite the contradictions, the two sides have worked out an agreement. After a meeting in Washington, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu and US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced a roadmap for Manbij. Just after that, Turkish and US soldiers began conducting patrols in northern Syria along the Sajur River, which separates Manbij and areas controlled by Turkey. Under the deal, the YPG is to withdraw from Manbij and Turkish and US forces are to jointly maintain security and stability in the town. That's if the promises are kept. Can Hasasu, Straight Talk.
And joining me now to discuss this further is Nawar Saban. He's an analyst at the Omran Center for Strategic Studies, and retired US Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He is former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs under George W. Bush. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Let's begin with you. Tell us about the Manbij roadmaps. 3 phases, 1, 2 almost over, joint patrols, independent patrols, north and south of the Sajur River.
Yep.
And now the 3rd phase. Tell us about that.
Well, the most important thing to recognize is that the overall objective is to ensure that Manbij is no longer seen as a YPG sanctuary, that it relieves the concerns that Turkey has, that there is a YPG presence as agreed, that they would not be on the west side of the Euphrates. So there will be some more implementation that goes on. It will be conditions-based, but we believe that the agreement struck between Secretary Pompeo and the Foreign Minister of Turkey is moving along well, and we fully expect it to be honored and implemented.
How do you see the elections playing into all of this? Because now you have more certainty in Ankara. How do you think Washington is looking at the elections and the relationship moving forward with Manbij and elsewhere?
You and I have talked about this before, and I've said this many times. Manbij was an unnecessary distraction in the relationships between the United States and Turkey, particularly with the NATO summit coming up. I think this will be a great opportunity for President Erdogan and President Trump to reaffirm the strong commitment between our two countries, not only as bilateral allies, but as allies within NATO. That is the most important issue at play here, and Manbij demonstrates on both sides that we want to move forward.
What about the F-35s and this push to stop the transfer of those planes to Turkey?
Look, this is not all unicorns and happiness at this point. We still have some considerable issues that we have with all of our allies. This is not a
Then the Americans are raising concern about the S-400s, putting sanctions and all of that. What's going on there, General?
Well, I mean, look, again, S-400s, we believe, are an unnecessary defense system inside of Turkey, because what it does is it makes it harder for Turkey to get the intelligence and the ISR, the surveillance and reconnaissance, because we can't share it with the S-400 system. We look at NATO as an alliance. We should all be working together. We saw the S-400 as perhaps a poke in the eye of the United States for some other bilateral issues that we have.
Greece has Russian interceptors.
They do, but they are much further away from the action than Turkey is.
And I want to bring in our friend here as well, Nawar. Nawar, how do you see this understanding between the Americans and the Turks in the larger context of what's happening in Syria. In Daraa, we've got the Russians and the regime bombing civilian neighborhoods.
This kind of, first of all, this kind of agreement that's happened between the Turkish side and the American side, as Manbij being a distraction, this kind of agreement was like something. Eventually it's going to happen because it saved the Turkish part, another operation, military operation in the area. You're talking about a Manbij area, a huge area of more than around like 1,800 km square, have a lot of civilian and American presence and French presence.
I want to break in here. You're talking about a lot of civilians in that area. Most of these refugees or internally displaced Syrians that have fled from elsewhere,
right.
Yep. 5 or 6 million of them have ended up in Turkish-controlled areas, which is part of a de-escalation zone as well in Idlib. And now you have Bashar al-Assad coming out and saying that he's going to take it by force if necessary. What does that mean, Navar?
Let's talk about like Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian regime said a lot of stuff. For example, they said they are not using barrel bomb. They said that there isn't any Iranian military presence in Syria. For me, it's just a publicity stunt. You're talking about an area that's controlled by an international agreement. There is an international environment that is leading for this agreement.
Between Russia, Iran, Turkey, even the US now?
There is an agreement. So the Russian government, Damascus government cannot do anything. They can talk about it. Walid Ma'alem can talk about it. Bashar al-Assad can talk about it. Talk about whatever they want. But physically, they can't do anything about it. There is an agreement and it's going on.
I want to turn the conversation slightly towards Manbij as well and bring in some graphics for our viewers of what this roadmap, Manbij roadmap, means on the ground. So, well, it's a joint agreement to secure the city jointly. It means that the Sajur River, 12 kilometers north of Manbij city, has become a front line of sorts between the Turkish forces to the north and the YPG held south, even though the US has now started patrolling this particular boundary as well. YPG doesn't want to move out. In fact, it's SDF-linked. Manbij Military Council has come out and said Turkey will never be allowed inside Manbij. General.
It's unfortunate that they would say that because the United States has always said our relationship with these forces as temporary and tactical. There was no expectation, and there should be no expectation, that if that's the position the YPG holds, that the United States is going to stand behind them on this particular issue. Our agreement with Turkey is our agreement with Turkey. It is not with the YPG or the SDF inside of Manbij.
And then finally, towards a solution, Turkey, Manbij, US, there's a corridor there, Euphrates Shields territories, Afrin, and that area, in the bigger picture of it, where does this now end? Are we seeing the end game as far as Syria is concerned in Daraa play out, the last pocket of resistance for the regime?
No, you're not seeing the end game. You're seeing a whole different phase now in different areas, in the north, in the east, in the south. You're talking about lots of forces on the ground, militias, in different areas. Even you're talking about a fragile security situation, even in Afrin, Euphrates Shield, even in the Eastern Front. So it's a very different kind of phase that need more focus. It's not a war now. It's not something like opposition and regime. It's now something like everyone's fighting everyone for their own control. And now, for example, let's say even in ISIS, the regime and the Russian declared that they were able to vanquish ISIS. Now ISIS is hiding in the desert. And the general knows
around
that
Daraa, there's a little pocket of ISIS as well.
You know that you cannot secure the desert. It's different. Now ISIS is using the hit and run tactic, and it's for them it's something wonderful. They can come out from the desert, kill whoever they want, and for them this is a victory. Now you don't know where to attack ISIS.
Yeah, but the US says, now bring in General Kimmett here as well, that ISIS is largely defeated, that we have to slowly start pulling out of Syria.
Sure, let's take a look at where things were in 2014. There was a caliphate. There was a capital. There was ground being taken by ISIS all the way primarily to the gates of Baghdad. Look where it is now. It is virtually defeated. But we still have work to do to ensure that that area in the desert doesn't remain a safe haven and sanctuary. That's why the coalition remains inside of Syria right now. The only purpose for the coalition to be inside of Syria is to defeat and destroy ISIS. And we will continue to do that as long as it's necessary, but not 1 second longer.
Does it
than
mean
it's necessary.
eventually then, not just for the US, but for everyone to normalize some sort of relations with Bashar al-Assad?
I think that's
Will that
right.
be acceptable?
Well, we see now the SDF and the YPG reaching out to the regime for the purpose of negotiation to get back on that political track. Let's be candid. The situation on the ground at this point has the regime on its front foot. I don't think that negotiations are going to happen anytime soon because nobody comes to the negotiating table when they're winning. And right now, despite the fact that it's this evil triad between Russia, Iran, and the Syrian government that is winning, facts on the ground, they are winning. So they will come to an accommodation.
I'll give you the last word, Nabar.
Yeah, about the, this is when these forces need to talk to the regime, in my opinion, and it's something physical. The regime is there and he's winning, but his partners are doing all the job. So for example, eastern part of Syria, and you know that the Iranian-backed militia control a lot, but the Iranians now have something else to count on. They build their own local forces called LDF. Something different than the NDF, and the LDF is part of the military, the Syrian military. So now they
it's integrated into
exactly.
It.
Now they saved a position for them in the military. In the future, if they tell them remove your militia, okay, I will remove my militia. I have I saved my own place. Even Hezbollah controlled Al-Rida forces, controlled
and now they all have Syrian IDs.
Exactly. So we go out, we will stay, and any kind of negotiation with the regime have to go through us.
Thank you so much, General Kimit Nabar.
Thank you.
It's the story of a Syrian boy who wakes up blind. The heart-wrenching moment he finds out he can't see was caught on video, went viral, and had many people in tears. You can see the boy struggling to come to terms with his blindness as his father tries to comfort him. But unlike many other stories out of Syria, this boy is getting the treatment he needs. Adil Halim reports from Gaziantep.
This is the moment a Syrian boy realizes he's been blinded by a remote-controlled IED attack. That boy is 9-year-old Abdul Muin Hassan. He's now receiving treatment across the border in Turkey and vividly remembers what happened on the first day of Ramadan.
My mom and dad were going to check another house. They told me stay here with your siblings. My siblings were probably 10 meters away from me, and I was sitting in front of the mine. My younger brother said a woman came who was holding a motorcycle remote. She stood there and kept pressing it until the mine exploded.
He was rushed from Afrin Hospital to Azaz and then across the border to Kilis. Today, he can only see half a meter in front of him. His father says Abdul Muin only had 2 questions to ask.
The first one, where are my eyes? And the second, when is my mother coming? This is all that he asked me.
This is Abdul Muin's happy place, playing football with other Syrian boys he met here in Kilis. But it's of little comfort as he's still waiting the arrival of his mother, brothers, and sister who are still in Afrin. His father is amazed at his son's resilience.
I was surprised to see my son playing football. Playing football? Do you know what it's like for a father whose son couldn't see anymore? To come home 4 or 5 days later and find his son playing football? This is God's doing.
Abdul Muin still has a long way to go on his road to recovery. He'll need a corneal transplant and expensive and complicated eye surgery. Like most people who saw the video, Safwan al-Hajr was saddened and felt compelled to act.
His eyes are in a very sensitive condition. They are infected and there is an internal wound in one of the corneas. For this reason, the first surgery may not take place for a few weeks.
Possibly even by Abdul Muin's 10th birthday next month. Al-Hajr's volunteer organization has already raised money to pay for the procedure.
Like Abdul Muin's situation, there are at least 9 others that I know about in Turkey. There are people with cancer, bone problems, and other diseases. We will try to help them get the treatment they need, the best we can.
Back at home, Abdul Muin just wants to enjoy being a child.
I wish my eyesight would come back and I can go back to school.
A simple wish, returning sight to sore eyes. Adil Halim, Straight Talk, Kilis.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with Nearly Mustafa. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.